Yeah, it's a bit of insight that's really stuck in my mind, actually. I interviewed a 15-year-old. He'd been having a really tough time through the COVID lockdowns, and his mental well-being wasn't in the best place. He described to me this tug of war, I suppose I'd call it, between wanting to maintain his presence on social media and just be part of the conversation his peer group was having, and just be absorbed in this subculture he'd become part of almost by default. And at the other end of the rope, he felt, was this constant pressure and fear that if your presence diminishes, you quickly fall out of favor with your group. You miss things that become the subject of the next day's conversation. And just over a period of days, you can find yourself isolated very quickly. And it told us that we really need to think carefully about the role of social media in bringing our idea to life. There are all kinds of benefits, but the drawbacks can have a profound impact on the very thing, the very outcome that you're trying to improve. So this led us to think about what's in store for the even younger people that we are aiming our intervention at. How do we equip them for this world that they'll inevitably be growing into over the next few years? So that left a real impression on me.
For me, it was talking to a colleague who works in mental health and well-being, because this was all about mental health and well-being anyway, so it was an obvious person to speak to. But actually, some of the things that we had talked about in our project around collaboration and referrals back and forth and how that was going to work, talking to somebody who did it in practice, we very quickly come back and realised that this is not where we need to be going. So I think all of us collectively came up with that same conclusion from talking to different people. But I think for me, that one person talking directly to somebody who was actually doing every day what we talked about, and they were quite open around the challenges and the multi agency approach that we looked at was going to be very difficult. We're still going to do it to some degree, but it just gave us a lot more information on what those challenges are so we can almost avoid them before we get there.
So as part of the insight that I did, I spoke to quite a few people who were already delivering different types of social prescribing projects, some of them with young people, some of them with adults. But this particular piece of insight came from somebody who was already working with young people as part of an existing social prescribing project. And she dealt with a lot of teenagers with mental health problems, and she told me as part of our conversation that actually by the time they come to her, by the time they come on this particular scheme that she's running, it's just way too late, that actually the intervention needs to be there much earlier before they get to the teenage years. And just what was interesting about that bit of insight was that I wasn't alone in that. So when we regrouped afterwards and sort of debriefed on the insight we gathered, it was a obviously recurring theme that other people had picked up on as well, and that led to us kind of really rethinking the age focus and the kind of just redefining the problem all over again. And it was a real kind of pivot point within the project. So yeah, that's probably the bit that sticks out as the most significant bit of insight that I got as part of the work that I did.
Yeah, so I gathered quite a lot of insight and two things for me, I guess. I had conversations with organisations like Gwent Dragons, Newport County, and sports development teams from the local councils. And I think the thing that gave us the most insight around that was that they're doing amazing things out in the community already, because you almost think that you need to reinvent the wheel with these things, and where do we start and are we best placed to be delivering this? But actually there's a lot of organisations that are doing this already, and they might not be exactly what you want, but you can build on what they're already doing. You can work with them, you can coordinate things that will deliver far greater things than you could possibly do on your own. So that was a huge piece of insight. And also I had a conversation with a young person who had very severe mental health issues throughout their life and had first-hand benefited from being involved in sport. And how the sport that they were involved in really benefited them and completely changed their life, probably saved their life. So that was a huge amount of insight to actually prove to us that actually some of the assumptions we're making are right, that actually sport does help young people's mental health, and that was absolutely fantastic to hear.
Experiments with year 5 and year 6 pupils at a school here in Gwynedd, linked very much to our idea, but that experiment gave us wonderful insights, I believe, into what young children actually wanted to do in terms of their summer holiday maybe, and to build up their mental health resilience. And quite significantly was what they didn't want to do, and they came up with a few things that maybe we'd assumed that they would like to do. So that insight, in my mind, gives us clear direction in terms of where we go next with this pilot and what we should be focusing on, and just as importantly, what we don't need to focus on in terms of piloting ideas.